Christian persecution in America. The Constitution clearly gives us religious freedom, but the city of Boston chose to say, not here. See how, against all odds, the Constitution prevailed and what it means. Welcome to Freedom Alive. It all started in September 2017 when Liberty Counsel sent a demand letter to Boston city officials for banning the Christian flag on a public flagpole. Now fast forward to August 3rd, 2022, when the Christian flag was finally raised on that flagpole at the Boston City Hall Plaza. On today's program, Liberty Counsel's Holly Meade joins us to share more about that. I'm here again with co-host Mat Staver. And Matt, it was 5 years of litigation and an amazing victory at the Supreme Court that set the stage for that emotional and exciting day. And we've already seen the impact for religious freedom this case has and will continue to have in America.
This is an amazing situation because it should have been something that was a non-event. For 12 years, the city of Boston allowed all kinds of flags. They didn't deny anybody, but when Hal Shurtleff, founder of Camp Constitution, wanted to fly a flag that was a Christian flag, he was told no, not because of the flag itself, but because of his viewpoint on that flag. If he considered it to be secular, it was okay. If he considered it to be Christian, it was not. And we litigated, lost twice at the lower court, lost twice at the Court of Appeals, won 9-0 at the United States Supreme Court. In this case, set the tone for the most spectacular, transformative term of the Supreme Court in our lifetime. We'll go into more detail about that, but it's an incredible story and an incredible victory.
The word Christian really was the issue, right? On this
That was the only issue.
284 applications previously. I mean, it really centered on that word.
It's centered on that one word, the word Christian, that was on the application describing the flag being a Christian flag. If he had not put the word Christian before flag, if he had put any other non-religious word, a Camp Constitution flag or something else, for example, there would have been no issue. But it was that one word that raised the attention of a city official, and that's what caused the censorship.
A remarkable story with many implications for all of us. We cannot wait to bring it to you, but our Freedom Alert is next.
Court strikes down Biden administration's gender surgery and abortion mandate. I'm Mat Staver, co-host of Freedom Alive. An appeals court unanimously struck down a Biden administration mandate that forced doctors and medical facilities to provide so-called gender transition procedures and abortions and forced health insurance to cover them. Now the HHS cannot take action against medical professionals under Obamacare's anti-discrimination provision for refusing to perform these procedures which violate their religious freedom. This unanimous ruling is a major victory to protect religious freedom and conscience rights of medical professionals. These medical professionals who love God cannot participate in killing children or performing harmful, irreversible procedures against their conscience and medical judgment.
Up next, Matt's interview with Holly Meade from Liberty Counsel.
We'll hear argument first this morning in case number 20-1800, Shurtleff versus Boston, Massachusetts. Mr. Staver.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court. After 12 years with 284 flag-raising approvals, no denials, and usually no review, one word caught the attention of a Boston official, the word Christian on the application. The flag itself was not the problem. Had it been called anything but Christian, the same flag would have flown for an hour without incident. The policy does not limit the flagpoles to subject matters or speakers. All applicants are welcome, except religious viewpoints. The 2018 codification places religion in the same category as speech deemed inappropriate, offensive, supporting prejudice, or discrimination. To support its admitted viewpoint discrimination, the city raises one defense, that the public forum open for all applicants is really government speech. This court warned in Mattal that the government speech doctrine is susceptible to dangerous misuse. This is such a case. The city's flag-raising forum is not government speech under Walker and Summum. The city, by an unbroken history and practice and policy, expressly declared that the flagpoles are one of its public forums open to all applicants. In doing so, the city long ago crossed the line from government speech to private speech. A reasonable observer would understand this history and the policy. This observer would also see a private event coinciding with the temporary flag-raising event. The city exercised no control over the message, the design, and did not own the flags. The city never requested flags or messages to be changed and usually did not review them. The city's application alone cannot transform private speech into government speech. In light of the practice and policy, the decision below upholding viewpoint discrimination under the guise of government speech is dangerous and should be reversed. I welcome the court's questions.
What you just heard is the actual oral argument, January 18, 2022, that I delivered, and that was the opening presentation at the United States Supreme Court. And you heard the case being called to order by the Chief Justice, John Roberts. That began this argument on the 18th of January, Holly, and that was an incredible day.
It was.
And when the Supreme Court released its opinion in the case of Shurtleff versus City of Boston on May the 2nd, it was an incredible victory, 9-0.
I know. I remember the day after you did the argument, and then you and I did like a live stream after that, and it was freezing that day. I was in the studio at Liberty Counsel, and you're there in front of the steps, freezing. But just recapping and going over the argument and the questions that the justices asked, it was so exciting to hear. And then fast forward to that day when we got a 9-0 victory at the Supreme Court. I mean, that's historic.
That's historic.
All the justices agreeing on the same thing.
And we'll talk a little bit later in the program about the victory celebration on August the 3rd of 2022, when the actual Christian flag was raised during a celebration there in the City Plaza of Boston, Massachusetts. That was an incredible day as well. We'll talk about that in a few moments. But this case began in 2017. It should have been a non-event. And when I say a non-event, it should have just been, they would have approved the application. It was application 285. They've already approved for the previous 12 years 284 applications. They never denied a single one. They never reviewed any of the content. Lots of different varieties of private individuals had events, and then as part of that, the city had a flagpole that was a public forum open for all applicants.
And we're talking about they flew other countries, even communist countries. They flew an LGBT flag. I mean, all sorts of different agendas they flew with no problem. But when it came to the Christian flag, that sent up a trigger.
And it was the word Christian on the application. So it was very clear that they were censoring and discriminating against Christian viewpoints. Because the flag itself, amazingly, was not the problem. The flag is the Christian flag. Many of you have seen that, where it's white, it has a blue square in the upper corner and a red cross in that square. You'll see it sometimes in churches or in other places. It wasn't the flag that was the problem. It was Hal's perception of the flag, and it was on the application, one word that caught the attention. After 284 applications, one word caught the attention of a Boston city official, and that's the word Christian.
But if our client Hal Shurtleff had lied and called it the Camp Constitution flag, it would have been no problem. We'll fly the flag. But he chose not to, and he persevered through all of these court cases, and eventually we got to see the flag fly. But he was courageous in that way, that he would not relent and not call it the Christian flag as it is.
Hal continued to persevere. He contacted Liberty Counsel. We filed suit. We thought we would have won easily at the lower court. We lost. We lost again at the Court of Appeals, went back down to the lower court, got more discovery. Lost again at the lower court again. Went back to the Court of Appeals, lost again, 3-0. And then we asked the U.S. Supreme Court to take the case on September 30, 2021. They decided to take that case. That was an amazing day. But it was on May the 2nd that actually occurred. May the 2nd, I'll never forget it. And the Supreme Court released the Shurtleff versus City of Boston case 9-0. 9-0. I mean, it is incredibly rare to get
Very
a 9-0
rare.
case
Yes.
on anything,
Right.
especially a religious free speech case involving a Christian flag being raised in front of City Hall. And those naysayers really were shocked because 9-0, not a single dissent, unanimous decision.
Right. So let's fast forward to August 3rd. You know, Matt, I had envisioned you and Hal standing together and at that flagpole and raising the flag together. That was the visual I had. And when that came to fruition on August 3rd, that was very emotional for me personally, because I was running the live stream, so I was very involved in that. But going back and watching that, it was like, thank you, Lord. You have been faithful in all of this, and you get the glory of these two men standing there raising that flag, honoring you in the city of Boston. It was incredible.
It was an incredible day because, again, you think back to 2017, it would have been a small group.
Right.
Nobody would have noticed it.
But we had hundreds of people that day.
We had hundreds of
We
people.
had media cameras everywhere. We had people holding signs, cheering.
And there were even people from the businesses, the offices, the buildings next door. They were rolling down their windows or opening up their windows and listening to what was going on.
But it was a great witness to the community as well, Matt, because we had Amazing Grace being played. We had people speaking. One of the chaplains for Camp Constitution spoke. It was just a great testimony to the community, even those that weren't there to support us. In the media, I was so proud. There were so many media cameras there, and they put it right on their telecast for the noon after the event. But it was just historical. Yeah, but it was an amazing moment just watching that flag go up and flying and hearing the Amazing Grace being played. It was very, very very emotional.
That's the flagpole that they designated open to all applicants. And so that's the flagpole that had the 284 flags of different individuals and organizations with no censorship, and that's the one he was denied in 2017. And
right,
actually,
one flagpole has the American flag, the other has the Boston City flag, and then the other one is the one they opened for the public.
Yeah,
at least they did at that time.
And so this particular one is the one that we were able to raise and have that celebration. And it really is the faithfulness of God as well to bring that moment together. And what was intended for harm, we go back to like Genesis 50, where Joseph is now meeting his brothers who wanted to do harm to him. And in Genesis 50, it says, what you intended for harm, God intended for good.
Right.
And what was intended to censor and harm and discriminate and silence Christian viewpoints ultimately was shouted from the rooftop around the world. From May the 2nd onward, we've looked at media every single day, and there wasn't a single day for months and months and months and months where there was media not talking about this. There was always something in social media or other media talking about the implications of this case.
You know, and I was just thinking back to that day, I was so proud, first of all, to be a part of the Liberty Counsel team, that we persevered through this. I mean, how many times would you go 4 losses at the courts and think, okay, we're going to keep going, and asking the Supreme Court, and then getting a 9-0 victory, and then standing there and seeing it all come to fruition. You know, what were your thoughts as you're standing there? I know you were busy raising the flag, but just standing there looking at the crowd thinking, here we are.
Well, it was an amazing moment to be able to do that because what happens is we're part of a team, and it's not any one particular person. It's a lot of people that come together that God has brought together at Liberty Counsel to be part of this team. And, you know, there are different times where you have losses, but I look at those as temporary setbacks. And obviously we had 4 temporary setbacks, and they were now in retrospect temporary because we had the most incredible victory that I've ever had to have a 9-0 decision, or anyone would ever have, is having a 9-0 decision at the Supreme Court.
And you know, I think those losses make you stronger and give you more motivation to keep going, to know that, Lord, you are going to have the victory in the end.
Absolutely. And then at the time where you're seeing people gather together, and you see people in the crowd with 9-0 on signs that had the Supreme Court superimposed behind it, 9-0 over the top of it.
Or let freedom fly. We had those signs.
Fly. Yeah. And then people had the little
Christian flag, waving.
And then the big Christian flag is up on the flagpole. And then we have people speaking about that day, and Camp Constitution's founder, Hal Shurtleff, speaks. and then others share as well. And then we have amazing songs, and like Jonathan Alexander had an amazing closing song. He has an amazing voice. To have that celebration and then to walk through that city and to realize where we are in the city of Boston. This is the place of the Boston Tea Party. This is the place of many of the founders. This is the place that we call the Cradle of Liberty.
Right.
And liberty was alive and well until they decided to censor it some years ago. And then because of one person and an organization, Liberty Counsel, that stood up, freedom returns to the Cradle of Liberty. Liberty is back in the Cradle of Liberty.
You know, speaking of Jonathan Alexander, you know, his family is originally from Haiti, and of course his parents are now pastors of a church there, as you mentioned before. But I got to meet them for the first time. They were there, and his mother, so cute, raising her little flag, and and they took pictures together with the flag, and I'm sure that had an impact on him and his family to see that all come together in their hometown of Boston.
Well, it was Jonathan Alexander, who works in our Washington, D.C. office, who actually put us in contact.
He started it all, didn't he?
With
Yeah.
Hal Shurtleff, because he got contacted by somebody that said this person, Hal Shurtleff, filed an application and it was denied. And he was the one who made the contact with Hal Shurtleff and then brought it to our attention and said, this is a specific issue. And we said, yeah, we'll take the case. We thought it would be resolved fairly quickly, but it wasn't. It took 5 years to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. But the implications of this case, let me just say, and we said this before, Holly, it's not just about a Christian flag.
Right.
If you think that this is just about a Christian flag, and you think, well, where are you going to fly a Christian flag in other places on a flagpole? Well, probably not too many places. But what this was about is discriminating and silencing Christian viewpoints in an open forum that's open for everybody else's viewpoints, but they don't want your viewpoint.
So it affects every single believer. This case does.
This case affects every believer. It affects free speech in an incredible way, because what they decided to do is allow everyone else to speak. You all could have your different viewpoints, and they could be all kinds of radical viewpoints. You could be pro-communist and pro-Cuba and pro-Turkey and pro-China and pro-Mao Zedong, and there were people that had raised flags that were supporters of Mao. Mao was an incredible terrorist of individuals who is responsible for the deaths of many millions of people during the revolution that became the People's Republic of China, the communist China that we see today. And there are people that wanted to raise those flags and historically have raised those flags to celebrate Mao, this incredible, brutal dictator. All of that is welcome. But if you wanted to raise for just a few moments, maybe an hour during your event down at the base of the flag, a Christian flag, to recognize the Judeo-Christian history and the Christian communities of Boston and Massachusetts, you're not welcome here. That was the big issue, and the city of Boston didn't hide that. They didn't try to gloss over it. They actually said that indeed they were required to censor Christian viewpoints, and they relied upon a 1971 case called Lemon versus Kurtzman. It was a terrible Supreme Court case.
That skeleton that they pull out every time they want to.
And that's what Justice Scalia said many years ago, that it's like a goblin
skeleton in the closet,
during a late night horror show, and it comes out and scares people, and the courts or judges pull it out when a judge wants to erase religion, particularly Christian viewpoints or religious symbols, words, or displays. You pull it out, it scares the government officials, so they decide to censor, and yet you put it back in the shelf because the Supreme Court uses it sometimes, the Supreme Court sometimes doesn't use it. You know, when we started Liberty Counsel back in 1989, we wanted to strengthen the free exercise clause. We wanted to strengthen the free speech clause for Christian viewpoints, particularly for freedom of speech. And we wanted to ultimately overturn this 1971 Lemon test. We also wanted to overturn Roe versus Wade. All of that began many years ago, but all of that came to fruition in 2022. And I want to expand on that in another program.
Sure.
But here, the city of Boston used this 1971 case. The 71 case has been used to remove nativity scenes, Christian words or symbols, to take God out of valedictorian speech when schools say you can't use the word God, to remove God from songs that children sing in school, to ultimately censor red and green, believe it or not, during Christmas because it's got Christmas-related themes, to allow Frosty the Snowman, but not to allow a nativity scene surrounded by even Santa Claus, for example. It has been used to challenge the Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God. It's been used to, in this case, censor a Christian flag if you considered it to be Christian. It was used later on in this same Supreme Court term to censor a coach by the school district out in Washington that said it's okay if the coach kneels down and he thinks secular thoughts, maybe where he's going to order the next pizza. But if he thinks religious thoughts like prayer, oh, we have to censor that. Why? Because of this Lemon test, this Lemon versus Kurtzman 51-year-old precedent. And in this case, the justices unanimously, 9-0, rejected the city's argument and said, no, it doesn't apply. And Justice Gorsuch soundly criticized Lemon and actually made another analogy that it's like a video game.
Like an avatar, isn't it?
Like an avatar. And in fact, the avatar has a nasty, sour mood. And you point it to a word or display, and you ask it how it feels.
Right.
And he naturally feels sour, so you wipe out the Christian viewpoints, the flags, the Christian words, the symbols, and the displays.
But you know, Matt, bringing home this case, this great victory that really affirms and strengthens our religious viewpoint, say, I want to have a Bible study in a public library or have some other kind of gathering in a public place. This affirms my freedom to do that.
Absolutely, and that's why this case is so important and it has such an incredible precedent. So it's not limited to this, and I think it's because the way that the city of Boston actually positioned it, and that is they wanted to censor the word Christian. They said that they were justified in doing it by this 51-year-old Lemon test, which the Supreme Court ultimately did away with in 2022. I want to just encourage you, if you have an issue where your religious freedom is infringed, or you know of somebody who is encountering this, whether it's in school, whether it's a situation out in a public forum, doesn't matter where it may be, could be at work, I encourage you, don't get discouraged, to stand up, because what is ultimately meant for harm, God can turn around for good. And the difference between that and not having any impact at all is one person, like Hal Shurtleff, standing in the gap. And perhaps God is calling you to be a voice, not to look for a problem, not to create a problem, but if something happens, don't walk away. Stand up like Hal Shurtleff did and let God do the rest. For more information, you can always visit us at Liberty Counsel's website, lc.org.
But you know, I think, Matt, God is calling all of us to do that. All of us to stand up for our religious freedom.
Yeah, I think so.
You know, I mean, it's a calling he gives us. You know, Haggai chapter 2, are you going to stand up and be the church I've called you to be? Or are you going to sit in your paneled homes and cower? We have got to stand up and be the church that he's called us to be. Hal is a great example, but I think he's calling us, wherever we are, to do the same.
Absolutely. Stand up for freedom, but most of all, stand up for our Lord Jesus Christ and be a light to the world.
Matt, I want to come back to the significance of the word Christian on this. Is this a preview of coming attractions for us in our country?
I remember we had a case involving Fellowship of Christian Athletes with a school in Central Florida, and we were talking to the school board attorney. And what these young people did was they had a talent show, and the kids were allowed to sing any song they wanted to. And the song was Carmen's song about we need God in America, we need God. And he said that it would have been okay if they would have just stopped with we need God, but they then went and they used in the next verse, we need Jesus. And he says that's what caused the issue of censorship. our lawsuit, we also prevailed in that case, but it was the name Jesus that ultimately caused the censorship there. In this case, it's the word Christian that caused the censorship, or that resulted in the censorship, because it was that one word that they wanted to exclude. So I think it is a preview. The good news is that this case really stops that agenda in so many ways. It doesn't mean that the battles are over. It means that we have a very strong case now to use in other cases to combat this kind of intentional exclusion of Christians and Christian viewpoints from the marketplace of ideas. And that's why this case is so significant.
Yeah. At the same time, I mean, the reality of it is sobering, really. I mean, when you think about the significance of what happened in that case, and I think really on behalf of all of us, I just want to say thank you to you and your team, because this was an enormous, enormous accomplishment with really incalculable implications, as you've mentioned.
Yeah, you know, you can take, for example, this area, put it in the context of zoning, and you want to have a church in a storefront, or you want to have a church meeting that starts, for example, in a school, and they open up that facility to others, or you want to have a church in other areas, and they allow everyone else to meet there, but then they say, well, you can't have a religious service. Well, wait a minute, I can actually have a theater, a public theater, and we can have people gather, and we can have all kinds of different movies. But if the purpose of our gathering is for worship, then that would be restricted. And that has been happening over the past decades. And so those are the battles that we've been involved in. And it's because of this idea of the secularization then permeating into the marketplace of ideas, so that Christians and religious free exercise are ultimately eliminated. And that's why we have to constantly, Steve, be vigilant. And when these battles come, we can't walk away, because if we do, someone else is going to confront this, and the censorship will just get more entrenched and emboldened. Hal could have walked away and done something different, but he didn't walk away. And as a result, we have a 9-0 opinion that now is a precedent that's going to be at the Supreme Court for the rest of our lives, and that precedent will have great fruit in so many different places in other areas around the country.
Well said, well said. It's our delight to bring you stories like this time after time on Freedom Alive. In closing, remember Galatians 5, verse 1, which says, "It was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery." Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. So join us here next time, where you will hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.